How much gold you really need is a simple question that requires a very complicated answer. And the answer really depends on your circumstance. What you're looking at right now is what you need if you made $100,000 a year. I'm gonna encourage you not to focus on what that number is. Instead, how about we focus on developing a framework for you to answer that question that best fits you, your situation, and your needs. Let's talk about it. The reality of our situation as quote unquote regular people is that much of the advice given to us is watered down, oversimplified, and feels like sucker advice most of the time for the benefit of the current financial system and those in power. Many of the wealthy and rich don't invest in the same things or invest in the same way as Joe Public. Their one-size-fits-all approach ends up not fitting anyone. This is where we have to invest in ourselves and especially our financial education, as it opens a whole new world of opportunities to us. Additionally, the problem that I have with most of these approaches really is that they push us to invest passively and into basically 3 or 4 classes: stocks, bonds, cash, and maybe real estate. And that the safest thing to do is to turn our money over to someone else. That's why there's a joke, we call them brokers, because they're usually broker than you. One of the lessons that I've learned in life is that I don't take advice from people poorer than me, and I don't let them manage my money. Over my 20 years of actively investing, I found that a broader view of my investing to be more meaningful. And thus I've avoided the traditional suggestions and framing of asset allocation in particular. Specifically, a 60% stocks, 30% bonds, and 10% cash allocation. Because this totally ignores a very specific and significant investment vehicle and even a class of investment that I love to call life and wealth preservation allocation. As we dig into this, for those of you who would like to nerd out with me, some of the foundation of my thinking or my framing comes from modern and postmodern portfolio theory. Here's a link on the screen if you are really interested in learning more about it. But as a quick aside, MPT is a practical method for selecting investments in order to maximize their overall returns within an acceptable level of risk. It was developed by American economist Harry Markowitz, which he was later awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for. So instead of a typical allocation classes like bonds and stocks, I like to think of my investments by risk levels: high risk, low risk, moderate risk, and then really a special category that I've kind of referenced here that I've kind of created and I call life and wealth protection. Personally, I like to think about allocations in terms of risk level rather than categories, is because within each of those categories of investments, you still have things that are high, moderate, or low level risk. So I don't believe it really gives me enough information. However, I believe this broader view offers a little more sophisticated of a tool for me and helps me manage my money and my situation better. Personally, I like to think about things in terms of risk level rather than categories like stocks, bonds, etc. Because within each of these categories of investments, you still have things that are high, moderate, and low risk. So I don't believe it really gives you enough information or gives me enough information. However, I believe that this broader view offers a more sophisticated tool for me to manage and tweak my personal situation. Which brings me to the first thing that you have to consider or ask yourself when it comes to this topic. How much time, energy, effort, and learning are you willing to invest in your financial planning? Let's answer that maybe on a scale of 1 to 10. For those where the number are lower, then framing your investment as traditional categories like stocks, bonds, etc. might make a ton of sense. Those who have numbers that are higher, then you might want to consider what I'm sharing. For me, life and wealth preservation allocation serves a number of purposes. 1, obviously to protect my wealth. 2, it's the hedge against inflation. 3, it's my, stuff goes bad money. And 4 is my opportunity capital. I believe this should be treated as a broad concept, which will also allow for a wider range of things to be considered. As stackers, most of us would consider our wealth preservation or protection to be precious metals. But that doesn't mean it couldn't include things like diamonds, collectible artwork, or time-tested memorabilia like, baseball cards or something like that. Beanie Babies, no way, get out of here. I also want to be clear and draw a distinction between a 3-month emergency fund and my life and wealth protection fund, because those are very different. The portfolio cash should be 3 to 6% of your salary or family expenses for emergency. On the other hand, the opportunity capital that I talk about within the life and wealth preservation or protection, cash on hand, not in the bank, that can be used for speculative investments if I want to do that, like crypto. It can be used for dry powder or other investment opportunities. And it's like what I like to think about when I think of a bug out situation where you need to grab your cash, your valuables, and get the heck out of Dodge. That's what my opportunity capital is about. I know you clicked on this video to determine how much gold, silver, cash you need, and I've given you everything other than that. And while I'm getting there, I think that's also the point. No one can tell you exactly what you need without knowing your situation. What I want to give you instead is a framework that allows you to think and work through this situation so that you can determine the answer that is best for you and not the one size fits all. With that, let's dig a little bit deeper. Now that I've kind of converted you into thinking about life and wealth protection as an allocation class, how much allocation do you really need? Again, that's really going to depend on your situation and the context of what else you have in terms of investment and your overall portfolio risk. That aside, most professionals suggest 5 to 10% of your investments being precious metals. Instead of using that, which you can, don't get me wrong, I want you to maybe think about all of your investments and allocations as being fluid and dependent upon the economic situation and condition. For example, does it make sense to be overweight in stocks and bonds right now? Exactly. In my world, managing my finances is not like throwing the turkey in the oven where you come back a few hours later and you see what you have. It's also not like making a rule where you're constantly stirring and fussing with it, but it's like cooking a really good steak. It does require your attention, but you're really just there letting the heat, butter, and seasoning do all the work while you monitor the situation. Before I dig into specific numbers or a formula of sorts, I want to make sure we're clear about a couple key points. One, the life and wealth protection category, like other allocations, should be seen as fluid and therefore something that is adjusted to fit your current economic situation. Two, the allocation should reflect much of life and wealth that you are actually trying to protect, especially in a situation like we are in now. And three, any numbers I give should just be adjusted to fit you. With that, here's one way I would answer that question of how much gold I need. And what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to set up a situation. I'm going to pretend like I'm setting this up for my nephew that I love so much. Hopefully you're watching. Love you, nephew. To make things simple, let's say he makes $100,000, which would be about $70,000 after tax. All right, let's call that $6,000 a month in income. The first thing he would want to do is to have 3 months of after-tax salary, not expenses, in his emergency or cash bucket. Note that this is not the life and wealth fund, but it's a best practice. So you need to have that $18,000 or so in emergency funds in cash. Obviously, the more would be better. And he could always add on to that and get up to maybe 6 months equivalent later once he starts to develop the other kinds of asset protections and allocation he needs. If the baseline goal is basic wealth preservation, then I would reason that he would need double of his emergency fund in his life and wealth preservation account. My rationale is if he lost his job, he would first tap into his $18,000 in savings, which will cover him for a little over 3 months or so because technically he should have some lower expenses. That would mean he needs a total of $36,000 in his wealth preservation fund, or around 18 ounces of gold, or a mix of gold and silver. So for those of you that are holding on, there's your answer, but it gets a little more complicated than that. It could also be 9 ounces of gold and $18,000 in cash. In fact, I would argue that maybe a more appropriate mix would be 12 ounces of gold, so about 2/3 of that fund, of whatever metals that you would want to mix. Now, I would personally lean more towards gold because it tends to be more stable than silver. A minimum of 1 month of salary, or $6,000 for dry powdered or speculative investments, and then $6,000 in other wealth preserving items. It might be I-bonds or short-term CDs if they give a decent return, or collectibles. Those are some of those things that I mentioned earlier. If you find value in this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because Stackers is here to help you get the most metals for your dollar, and I do not want you to miss a single video. Plus, it helps the channel grow and helps us get out to more people. Also, give yourself and me a thumbs up for taking the next steps towards greater wealth by clicking that thumbs up button, and check out all the pretty colors that show up on the screen once you do. So if things went bad in his life, between his 3 months of salary and 6 months equivalent of wealth preservation, he could theoretically keep his same quality of life for close to a year And that would be without receiving anything like unemployment, part-time work, or even a side hustle. In my mind, the ability to sustain yourself for a year without selling anything or dramatically changing your life is by definition life and wealth preservation. Technically speaking, wealth preservation is defined as managing your assets in such a way to ensure that the value of your asset does not decrease or erode. With wealth preservation objectives, the notion of maintaining existing wealth is more important than making more money. I know this amount sounds like a lot, but remember that this is a goal to work towards. With that, I do want to make a couple things clear because I think it's very important. This number is not where you need to be tomorrow. It can be 5 years, 20 years, whatever. It's your goal. I've made these suggestions kind of following a 70-30% rule where your investments come out of your 30% and that 30% is your tithing and all this other stuff. So that'll give you a sense of how to set up a plan for yourself. When working towards these goals, you should absolutely be after any contributions to an employer matching retirement plan. Can't stress that enough. That's free money. My nephew will still need to be investing in other asset classes like stocks and bonds, etc., while developing his life and wealth preservation or protection fund. He should not take an all or nothing approach to building this allocation. Slow and steady will win this race. So he could do this as a tenth of an ounce at a time. He needs to write this down as a goal with a plan, something that he can follow. I need to remind you that this is just my one-size-fits-all approach. And most importantly, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a faceless dude on YouTube. I'm not qualified to give you advice. My formula would be 18 ounces of gold for every $100,000 in salary, or a 36% allocation. At the same time, in our current environment, I would actually be heavier in my life and wealth preservation and cash positions. My nephew, he could also go lower based on his personal situation or risk tolerance. As I always share with you folks, I might be right, I might be wrong, but at least you know the logic behind my position or my belief. And the best part of it all is, just like being in the kitchen and you get to be your own chef, you get to be your own investor, you get to make your own decisions, because you always have to own your own results. In the comments section, please share with me, what do you think about this idea of a life and wealth preservation allocation? Do you think 18 ounces of gold for every $100,000 in salary is high or low? Why? Feel free to share any comment. You always can just type high or put an A+, because you are my A+ students for seeing this video all the way through. As a reward, go ahead and give your sweetheart an extra kiss tonight. If you're in between sweethearts, look in the mirror and give yourself a kiss. And if you're feeling really out there, go ahead and knock on the neighbor's door and give them a kiss too. Always stack smarter and never stop learning.